Now, of course, it's very important to look at the particulars of what the characters Glaucon and Adeimantus say in the beginning of Book 2 in their hypothetical arguments in favor of the unjust life over the just life. And perhaps the most important, or at least most striking, thing that's said in the course of that is the so-called Ring of Gyges story. And that is not so much an argument as an illustration of a certain view. The notion that if you found yourself with the power to be unjust without suffering consequences of being unjust, that is, this notion, this ring that turns you invisible, what would you do? What would anyone do? And what Glaucon seems to be saying, well, not seems to be saying, is saying in that story, is that everyone would use the ring to benefit themselves without the kind of scruples that we normally carry around about that, because without the punishments for being unjust, it seems to be saying, we have a default drive in human nature that would take over, and we're selfish, and we do what benefits ourselves, and without the threat of punishment, we're going to do that. So he says, for instance, at the end of the Ring of Gyges story on page 39, this, some would say, is strong evidence that no one is just willingly, but only when compelled. No one believes justice to be a good thing when it is kept private, since whenever either person thinks he can do injustice with impunity, he does it. Indeed, all men believe that injustice is far more profitable to themselves than is justice. And what they believe is true, so the exponent of this argument will say. For someone who did not want to do injustice, given this sort of opportunity, and who did not touch other people's property, would be thought most wretched and most foolish by everyone aware of the situation. So, the idea is that everybody would take advantage of it, because that's just what human nature is. And that really is the thrust of the whole Adeimantus Glaucon thesis at the beginning of Book 2. And then, so the question again is, how is Socrates going to defend justice? And remember that he's got to prove that justice is something that we should always want, no matter what. That is, that the happy life, the good life, is impossible without justice. And that the choice of injustice, however seemingly profitable would be, and by injustice just means selfish behavior that benefits oneself without regard to any principles of morality or the welfare of others. Let's say that's what the life of injustice is. That could never be a happy life. That could never be a fulfilling life. And that, frankly, is a very large and difficult thesis to try to prove. So how will Socrates go about doing this? In a very surprising way, and in a way that will lead us into all sorts of different topics. But let's always remember that this book is about that question. Which is the better life, the life of justice or injustice? So Socrates' response to all this, his response to all this begins on page 46. He says around the middle of the page, the investigation we are undertaking is not an easy one, in my view, but requires keen eyesight. So since we are not clever people, I think we should adopt the method of investigation that we would use if, lacking keen eyesight, we were told to identify small letters from a distance, and then notice that the same letters existed elsewhere in a larger size and on a larger surface. So what's that larger surface? The larger surface is this city that he's building. So remember, what is he trying to get out of building the city? He's trying to get a better idea of what justice is, to find out what justice and injustice are. The notion, or at least the conceit, being that it'll be easier to see on the larger scale of the city. But remember, why is he looking for justice and injustice? This is the plan: to build this city, and because it's a larger scale, to find out more easily what justice is and what injustice is. And then we'll know what justice and injustice are, and they should be the same, he says, in a city, in a political community, and in an individual. In if we know what justice is in the individual, we'll be able to identify who the just man or the just person is. And if we can identify who the just person is, then we can find out if they're happy. We can find out if they're happier than the unjust person. So that is basically the plan of building the city. Now what we've got to do in books 2 and 3, the rest of books 2 and 3, is to find out what this city is like. The idea that we will build this city, we'll try to make it as just as possible, Socrates says. Then we'll know what justice is, and we'll see how injustice comes into the city too. And if we find out what those things are, then we can look back and find out who the just individual is, find out whether they're happy, and find out crucially whether they're happier than the unjust individual. So looking at the rest of book 2 and the whole of book 3, we'll be looking at this city and its peculiar social structure. And then in book 4, we'll be coming back to the original question and asking what justice is.